Hello everyone and welcome back to the Blaise XPerience once again. I am your host Derek as always, and you are joining us for episode 67 today. Today's episode is going to be another State of Decay episode, and today we're going to talk about how to manage outposts in the game. So there's a lot of different types of outposts you can get in the game, and we're going to talk about which outposts are better. We're going to rank those outposts, but in addition to that, we're also going to kind of discuss some of the meta and how to actually manage your outpost properly. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I have some suggestions for potential new outposts in the future as well. So that's kind of what today's episode is geared towards. It's basically a full episode on outposts in the game and, how to manage those properly, because I think a lot of people, they just grab whatever outpost they see and they don't really think about as much in depth what outposts you should be grabbing, what mix of outposts you should have, and things like that. But before we get into that, our next stream is going to be possibly on Sunday night. So you're going to be hearing this on a Saturday. And on the Sunday, there might be a stream. I'm not quite sure yet. If there's not a stream on Sunday, I would probably try to do one on a Tuesday. But the Tuesday one will be during the day. If there's one on Sunday, it'll be at night. The next podcast is going to be next Saturday on State of Decay 2 again. I'm not going to have a Wednesday podcast because, as I announced last episode, we're going to be making some changes to the podcast. So basically, the 1-year anniversary of the podcast is coming up on March 16th. So we are going to be making a lot of changes. I have a lot of things that I'm trying to figure out and work on. There's going to be a lot of changes to the schedule of the podcast and everything down the line. So basically, in order to prepare for all those changes, what I'm doing is I'm cutting back on some of the episodes currently, and then we're going to hit the ground running with all the new changes on March 16th. So there will be, I won't mention too much about these changes yet because I haven't decided them in full, but there are going to be some differences, and we might cut back in some areas, but add other things in other areas. So there's still going to be a lot going on. It's just we might refocus a little bit and have some things cut back and then add in some other things in different spots. So it's a little bit hard to explain right now because I haven't figured it all out yet. But basically just know that there's a lot of changes coming. All of them are going to be good for the podcast, my streaming, everything down the line. So a lot of them are going to be, really good changes that I think you'll all enjoy. So stay tuned for that. It should be a lot of fun. But basically, you're probably only going to have one more Wednesday episode between now and March 16th, I'm thinking. I'm going to try and do an episode on Crackdown 3, which I think would be a fun episode to do and, talk about when that game comes out. So I'll talk about that game and kind of see how it is. But besides that game, I don't think right now there's going to be another Wednesday episode until March 16th. And I'm going to try and keep up the weekly State of Decay podcast until that time. And then we'll kind of announce, what we're doing going forward. But the only thing I will definitely make sure to let everyone know is State of Decay coverage is not going anywhere. I might change things slightly, but there will still be State of Decay coverage and you will still get plenty of coverage. So don't worry about that. There's still going to be plenty of State of Decay coverage. It's just I might be changing things slightly around, and we'll see where we go from there. And amidst those changes, there might be 1 week between now and March 16th that I end up taking a week off fully, which means I might take a week that has no State of Decay podcast, no Wednesday podcast, just 1 week completely off, which since I started the podcast hasn't really happened often. I have 1 week in December that I missed a week because Undead Trials 2 was going on. It took a lot out of me, so that was the only week I really missed after I had a little hiatus. There was a time period between, I think it was a little bit in the summer. It was around May, June, or July. I had about a month I didn't release this podcast because I had a lot going on at the time and I had a small hiatus, but ever since I came back from that, we've been going strong, and we've had at least one podcast every week, a lot of weeks too, all the way from then until now, except that 1 week in December. So there haven't been a lot of weeks skipped. I might skip 1 week between now and March 16th just to get ready for all the changes that are coming, because I'm going to try and open up Patreon and try to focus on the stream a little bit more. But also the podcast won't go away or anything like that. I'm going to just try and focus on other areas as well to kind of grow everything at the same time. So it should be a lot of fun. And, everyone that's sticking with me through this ride, I appreciate it. And I thank you for sticking with me. So it really means a lot. But that being said, that's enough about, news and how we're going forward. Let's get into today's episode. So today we only have myself on. It's a solo episode today. So I know we've had a lot of guests on, but I do still like doing these solo episodes at some points. So I will still be doing some solo episodes, and today is one of those. And today is going to be how to manage outposts in State of Decay. So basically with your outposts, the key is to get a self-sustaining base, and you use your outpost to do that. So combine with all of the things you can build in your base, the facilities and the mods you can put on them, the facility mods. Combine with all those things, your outposts are really key to keeping your community happy and making sure that you have a self-sustaining base. So you obviously have your food meter, you have your materials, you have your meds, you have your ammo, your fuel. And basically with all these outposts, you just want to use these outposts to kind of work them together with the things in your base and have a self-sustaining community. So essentially what self-sustaining means is you're not losing anything per day. So you're not losing food per day. You're not like, oh, I have -2 food per day, or I have, -2 meds per day. You want to make sure that everything you have is all either at 0, meaning you're not, gaining or losing anything per day, or that you're actually gaining supplies every day. So the best thing is obviously, I have +2 ammo per day. I have +2 meds per day. I have +1 food per day. Like, obviously that's the best, is if you can get everything to the plus category. But if you can at least get it to 0, that's good enough, because you're not losing anything per day. And that's what you want. So the outposts are the best way to facilitate this, because those outposts have a lot of different options that you can use, and it's really handy to use these to help better your community. There's obviously hero bonuses, there's some community skills like lycanology, things like that can actually help as well. But these outposts are kind of your bread and butter for making a community really sustain properly. And with these outposts, there was something that was patched in an earlier patch, that a lot of people were just destroying outposts, making a new one, and then using that for a supply locker as they go along, searching things. And you can still do that, but now it actually doesn't refund you the full amount. So basically, there's some cost to actually doing like a roaming outpost. And I still do the roaming outpost sometimes, so it is still a viable thing to do. But you just want to make sure that you're picking the right outpost to do that with, because you don't want to pick an outpost that is really crucial to your survival and get rid of that one. Like, oh, I got rid of my ammo outpost, now I have to try and find another one at some point. Like, you want to make sure you're picking the right outpost that you don't really need that much. And with these outposts, it's really important that you actually spread them out throughout the map, because if you have all the outposts like by your base, for example, that doesn't really help anyone. What you want to do is you want to have the outposts spread out throughout the map, because you want to have it so if you're ever in a bad situation, you always have an outpost fairly close by, and you can run to your locker and, get more supplies. So you always want to have it fairly close by. Obviously, the maps are so big that you can't have an outpost, every 5 steps away from you, but you can at least have them close enough. That way there's some outpost in the vicinity of you. And that's kind of what you want. You want, okay, I have an outpost in the southeast. I have an outpost in the northwest. You want outposts all over the map. That way, anywhere you are, there's at least an outpost somewhere close by. And that's kind of the biggest key with the outposts, is to try and spread them out, but also use them to sustain your base. So it takes a lot of, planning to do this correctly. But if you plan properly, you can get the right outposts you need in the right spots. And basically with the outposts, you want to get the ones that give you the benefits that are harder to obtain in other ways. So, for example, food rucksacks are fairly common. Parts are really easy to get. And there's many other ways of getting parts. You can break down weapons and get parts. You can use piles of weapons remains and make those into parts as well. So there's plenty of ways to get parts, and food is pretty abundant as well, which now with the latest patch, you can actually make these things too, so it's even easier. But the ones that you have a harder time getting are the ones that you want in your outpost. So without further ado, let's actually talk about the outposts that we have in the game. So we have a food outpost, which naturally gives you 1 food. Basically, you're gaining 1 food per day from that outpost. You have a materials outpost. This gives you 1 materials per day. You have a medical outpost. This gives you 1 meds per day. You have a fuel outpost. The fuel outpost will give you 1 fuel per day. You have an ammo outpost. The ammo outpost will give you 1 ammo per day. You have a beds outpost, which basically gives you 2 extra beds for your people to sleep in per day. So essentially, it just takes up 2 beds that you wouldn't need to actually have in your base. They're basically like side beds that, these people can sleep in the outpost instead. That's kind of how that works. And then it's pretty rare. There's not that many in the game, and honestly, I haven't seen one in a long time, so they could have possibly patched it out. But I know at one point in the game, there were such thing as parts outposts, where you could claim the outpost, and it gives you plus 25 parts per day. So that was a thing at one point. I haven't seen it in a long time, though. So then again, I haven't been looking specifically for it, so I mean, if you specifically look for it, you might still find it, but I haven't actually, gone out and tried to look for it in a long time. But a parts outpost did definitely exist at one point. I'm not sure if it still exists. So basically, as I was saying with the outposts, the things you want most with these outposts are the ones that are hardest to get in other ways. So parts are pretty easy to get. Food is fairly easy to get. Materials, that's fairly easy to get. The ammo, that is not the easiest to get. And now that they've made ways to actually make supplies, it's a little bit better for, things like meds, ammo, fuel. It's a little bit better for this stuff because you at least have other options now. But even with having these options, I would still say that ammo is a little bit scarcer to find in the world, and for that reason, that is, a little bit higher of a priority. So you can use your supplies to make these now, but it's a little bit higher of a priority to have the ones that you won't find as often in the world. So you can make your ammo, you can make your meds now, you can make your food. Fuel, I think I was wrong on, actually. I'm not sure if you can make the fuel one, but fuel is pretty abundant anyway, so you're not going to have to worry about fuel too much. So the one that you definitely can't make, though, is a beds outpost, and that is one that you wouldn't think would be that valuable, but honestly, it's a pretty valuable outpost. The beds outpost, it's so valuable because it takes up room that you don't need to take up in your base. So just think about it. Say you have a barracks in your base. Instead of having that barracks, if you had like 4 beds outpost, that covers you right there. So yes, it's 4 outposts taken up by beds, which is a lot, but if you have another way to be sustainable inside your base, you're not wasting a large slot on your barracks now. And that can be handy because that large slot used on something else, that can be nice. So I'm a big proponent of using bed outposts to kind of fulfill your base a little bit. I mean, obviously, if it's a place like the container fort that, the beds come for free, then okay, they came for free anyway, so you don't have to worry about it. But there's some bases that really, have no beds at all, and it's kind of a challenge to get the bed situation under control. So outposts are definitely a way to do that. So essentially with these outposts, all you need to do is just think, okay, what do I need most, and what can I actually find in other places? If you are desperate for something at that moment, then okay, if you're desperate for food and you really need the food badly, then make a food outpost. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what they're there for. But if you're thinking long term, okay, what do I want as my long term outpost? Food is not one of the ones I would have highest up my list because food is pretty abundant in the world, and also you can make food rucksacks now, so you don't really need it as much. But something like a beds outpost or a parts outpost, those are things that you can't. But something like a beds outpost or a materials outpost, those are things that are, maybe a little bit harder to get because you can't actually make them now. They might be a little bit harder to find in the world. So you have to kind of weigh things out and see, okay, let me take on one hand, how easy is this to find in the world? Secondly, let me look at, okay, can I make this? Third, let me look at what do I actually need most? You might fuel might be a little bit harder to find than some of these other things, but you don't really need fuel as often. So fuel kind of, ranks down lower a little bit because when do you really need fuel? I mean, you can just go to a gas station, find a couple of fuel cans, you're pretty much good. You don't really need fuel that often, at least in the current state of the game. I mean, this difficulty update is coming at some point, so, when that does come, we'll see how that gets implemented, but, maybe you're going to need fuel more often than that. We'll see. Maybe, like, cars run out of gas in, like, 5 seconds. You never know. Of course, if it ran out of gas in 5 seconds, that would definitely be pretty challenging, and you definitely need fuel a lot, but we'll see how it goes. I mean, currently, fuel is not a resource, though, that you need too often. I mean, I'm sitting at, 40, 50, or however much my storage capacity is. I'm sitting at a lot of fuel just sitting my base rotting away most times because I just never need it. But before we actually rank the outpost, I did want to talk about a couple of potential new ideas I have for outposts. Some of these I don't think work as well as others, but for example, you could have maybe a weapon outpost where it's kind of like starting with the Warlord Legacy Boon, where you get a free weapon, randomly per day. But honestly, as I'm saying that, it's not like the greatest idea in the world, and I know that, and it's probably hard for them to implement. Well, maybe it not, because they do have things like the Sheriff Boon, which gives you things per day, but still, it seems a little bit cheap to get that from an outpost per day. But it's an idea I had. I just figured I'd throw it out there. Another one, though, is a consumables outpost, which I like a little bit better as an idea. So maybe, each day from this outpost, you get 3 bottles of painkillers, or you get, 5 stacks of bandages, or who knows what you get, but it's something like that where you get some consumables and they just kind of get delivered to your locker right away, which that'd be kind of cool to have an outpost like that. And I think that's a little bit more viable of an idea because you already have things like the Sheriff Boom, which gives you a lot of times meds every day. So that wouldn't be bad as an outpost, probably. Another one is a labor outpost, which in the current state of the game, labor is not really that important. So this outpost probably wouldn't get used that often, but it is an idea I had that could be implemented if, the labor system was changed a little bit, because currently the labor system, it's pretty easy to deal with the labor situation, and you never really run into trouble where like, oh, I can't make this right now, I had no labor. The only way you run into that problem is if you're making every single thing at once, which if you're making every single thing at once, then it's understandable that you have to wait a little while. So I would say, maybe Undead Labs could increase the labor cost for everything in the game. Maybe every building costs 2 people to do it instead of, like if it's a 1-person building, maybe it costs 2. If it's a 2-person building, maybe it costs 3 people. So I would just say increase the labor costs for everything and try that out maybe and see how that works, because, the labor right now just is too easy to manage. So this is where like a labor outpost could come into play if, the costs were increased. That labor outpost could actually help. Maybe it's, I don't know, like old lumberyard or something. And this outpost gives you an extra 2 labor per day, which that'd be kind of nice. And, if labor was different, then that would actually be pretty handy. Now, the last idea I had, which I thought would be pretty cool, it's probably my favorite out of my ideas, is the morale outpost. And I thought this would be really cool. Maybe like you have a community theater, or maybe it's a racetrack, or it's some kind of like entertainment area. And maybe, having an outpost there is a really big morale boost. And that would be really cool, because anyone that's struggling with morale, or they have a community, that just lost a person and they're kind of depressed, having this outpost could get them, maybe 10 morale a day, or 15 morale a day, or however much Undead Labs decided to put it at, whether it's 15, 20, 10, whatever amount is kind of more balanced. It would be nice to have that because it helps you manage your morale a little bit easier, and they could have this outpost cost a little bit more. It wouldn't be, your 300 influence or your 500 influence. Maybe this outpost costs, 7 or 800 influence just to claim it, and it's a little bit more costly, but you get a really nice benefit from it, and you have that morale constantly. So that'd be kind of a cool idea for an outpost, I think, because it fits within the mechanics of the game, and I think it would help the mechanics of the game a lot, actually. So yeah, a morale outpost, that could be a great idea, and I'd love to see that happen. But, that's pretty much the ideas I had, so now we can kind of move on to my rankings and, rank these outpost types and see where they fall. So, number 7 on my list, which is the lowest one out of them, is the Field Outpost. And the reason why I have Field Outpost so low is because for the amount that you find in a game and the amount that you need it, it's just not that much. It's not like, your community is going to starve and you need food, or you need the meds to heal your people, or you need the materials to build things. You really don't need fuel that often in the game. You only need it for refilling your cars, and the cars, have pretty good gas mileage right now, and they don't need fuel that often. So you're probably, going through a couple of fuel cans in one play session, and that's it. So, one rucksack carries obviously 3 potential fuel cans. So that's basically enough for one whole play session almost. So it's just one fuel rucksack. So you really don't use fuel that often. You can break it down to get some Molotovs maybe if you needed those, but you can always make those in your base instead. So fuel is really not as much of a factor in this game right now, and maybe with the difficulty update that'll change, but the fuel outpost right now is not something that is that viable to you. I would only take it just to make your community sustainable. So maybe if you're losing a fuel per day for some reason, maybe you have a generator going, then take a fuel outpost just to make that back at 0 at least, but it's not something that you're going to need in the game really. I probably would even say, don't make the fuel +1, because if you get it to +1 where you're gaining fuel per day, you're really going to, overstock yourself way too fast on fuel. I would say just keep your fuel at 0 and then go find it in the world, because you really don't need it that often. Number 6 on my list, as rare as it is to find these outposts, I would say it's the parts outpost actually. It's not an outpost that's that useful to you because, number 1, it's such a low cost. It's only plus 25 parts per day, which, that's not really that much, and you can get hero bonuses, or I believe traits, or I forget what it was, but it's like a hero bonus or a trait or something that actually does give you plus 25 parts per day. So you can get that other ways as well. And honestly, the parts are pretty common in the game. If you go to any warehouse, you go to any construction site, you're going to probably find parts there, and you can probably find parts in abundance in just one session. So you really never need the 25 parts per day. So it's kind of a waste of an outpost slot. It is nice to have that though, just because it's so rare to find it. So that's what's weird about it, is the rarity of this outpost does make it a little bit more unique, and it makes me want to use it just for that factor. But in terms of the functionality of it, it's not that functional to you, because plus 25 parts a day, that's not really something you're going to need that much. Number 5 is the materials outpost. And again, this is ranked lower because it's not something you're going to need that often. You're going to find a good chunk of materials in the world, and then on top of that, basically you only need materials when you're building your base. Once you have your base the way you want it, you don't really need materials anymore, because say you move bases. If you move bases, it's going to break down everything you built into materials for you, and then you can just use those materials again. So once you get enough materials to build the stuff you want the first time, you really never need materials again. So maybe that's a change that Undead Labs can make in the future to kind of counteract that, where if you move bases, maybe you don't get all your materials back. Maybe you get, 75% of them back, or 80%. And this might upset some players, but I think it would balance things a little bit more to where you still need materials to actually get back to where you're at. Because if you're picking up and leaving bases, that should come with some kind of cost. It shouldn't be just oh, let me just pack up, leave, rebuild everything. There we go, we're done. It should come with some kind of cost, because if this is happening in the real world, you'd have to rebuild all that stuff from scratch. You might be able to take, some items with you, but you're going to have to rebuild that from scratch. So I don't think they should go, all the way in the other direction where you don't get any materials back, but I think they should reduce it a little bit where you get, 80% materials back, or maybe, 70%, just somewhere around that range where you lose a little bit of materials, kind of like what happened with the Outposts. I mean, with the Outpost, they made the change where you actually lose some of your influence now if you destroy an outpost and buy another one. So I think that same change could happen with the Materials Outpost when you, or not with the Materials Outpost, but the same change could be installed with materials when you switch bases. But the Materials Outpost itself is just not that useful to you, because there's other ways to combat that. I mean, the one way it is useful is if you're using a lot of materials per day, then you're going to be, -3, -4 in some cases, and you're going to be like, oh, shoot, I'm losing so many materials per day. I have to, make an outpost to counteract that, which, yes, that is a way to do that, but honestly, the best way to get your materials to be self-sustaining is just make a staging area. I pretty much always have a staging area in my base right now, because the staging area helps so much, and it just eliminates all cost materials, and you don't have to worry about materials again. So that's what I do for that. I mean, technically, if you're, -2 materials per day, you can make 2 materials outposts, and then you're self-sustaining. So that does work. It's just using an outpost slot on materials, it's not the best use of your time. Number 4 is the food outpost. Now, the food outpost, you can actually make this in game now, and it's pretty common to find these in the world, and that's why it's a little bit lower for me. On top of that, if you use things like hydroponics, you use, farm level 3, if you use compost bins, there's a lot of ways to get food in the game and keep your people from being hungry. So for me, that brings the outpost, a little bit lower on the list, because there's so many other ways to get food in the game that you really don't need a food outpost that much unless you're in a, dire situation. Which, if you're in a dire situation, or you're just starting the game out, okay, go ahead, get a food outpost, keep yourself, sustained until you can actually get to a spot where you don't need it. But long-term, food outposts are really not much needed. Number 3 is a meds outpost, and meds are a little bit less common to find in the world, but you also use less of them when you're playing as well. So that's why this is a little bit lower, because with meds, you're only using, the 2 per day for your infirmary, and then you use meds when you, make some painkillers, or if you make, treatments go away. If you're making some kind of medical supply, or you're healing somebody, you're going to be using meds. But honestly, that doesn't happen often enough where I can really justify a meds outpost being higher in my priorities, because a meds outpost, it's nice to counteract, that -2 food per day. It's nice to counteract that -2 meds per day that you have for your infirmary, but beyond that, you don't really need it that much. And plus, if one of your survivors has lichenology, you really don't need a meds outpost. So it just depends on your situation a little bit, but the meds aren't used that much in game. So for that reason, mostly, that's why I say meds outpost isn't your number 1 priority, but it is a priority to have gaining meds, because you want to at least have plus meds per day, because that could come in handy if you have a survivor get hurt, or if you want to make more painkillers. It's always, worth it to have more painkillers and things like that in the game, because you can never run out pretty much. I mean, you're always going to need them for your survivors. So, if you ever get to a point where your meds are maxed out, okay, just use a couple of meds, make some painkillers. There you go. And then at least you use them wisely. At least you use them for something that's going to matter in the game. Number 2 is the ammo outpost. Now, the ammo outpost is one that was a lot more useful, or you could actually make ammo. Now that you can make ammo, it's a little bit less useful, but it's still pretty useful, because the only ways to get ammo in the game are basically going to like a gun shop. You can go to like a military facility or something like that. That's most of the places you can find ammo rucksacks are going to be military oriented. And before this change where you could actually make them, It was basically you either find them at these, seldom found places in the world, or you have to use an ammo outpost. And an ammo outpost is still pretty viable. Even though you can make ammo now, it's still viable to have an ammo outpost because it's so worth it. I mean, think about how much of the game you actually use ammo. Ammo is used all the time in the game, and it's very important to this game. So unlike meds, you're using ammo every second you play the game almost. I mean, you could be, doing some melee runs or whatever you're trying to do, or you could be driving around, but you use a lot of ammo in the game. So it's really important to have an ammo outpost. And even with the change where you can make ammo, I would definitely suggest having, 1 or 2 ammo outposts, depending how many you have. If you have more than 4 outposts, you definitely should have at least 2 of them being ammo ones. But of course, that only leaves 1 left. So the number 1 outpost in the game, in my opinion, is the Beds outpost. And you might be thinking, a Beds outpost, number 1? Seriously? Is this guy, full of it? Like, what's wrong with this guy? Well, like I was talking about before, I mean, the Beds outpost is not something that's easily replaced. Yes, there's facilities you can build in your base that, take care of beds for you. You can build the Red Talon bunk room and a small slot that takes care of 5 beds for you. You can build the barracks to take care of 8. You can build, the regular beds that take care of a couple of beds. There's different types of beds you can build in the game that satisfy different numbers of needs. The regular beds are obviously the worst ones because they can only fit 2 or 3 people if you upgrade. The barracks, that takes up a large slot, which you don't really want to take up. The Red Talon bunk room is the best fit right now because that does take care of 5 beds in a small slot, but a lot of us, have communities that are 9 people or bigger, so just having 5 beds, that's not going to cut it. So you need more beds. And the Beds outpost is such a handy thing to use because you basically take care of all of your beds somewhere else besides your base, and then that slot you would have had to use on the beds, you can use that for something else. So imagine if there was no such thing as Outpost. If Outpost did not exist, you would have to get every single bed crammed into your base somehow. So you might have to use, say you have a 12-person community. A 12-person community is possible. So you might have to put a barracks into your base, which covers 8 beds. Then you might have to put, a Red Talon bunk room in a small slot that covers 5 beds. There's 13 beds right there. So you would technically be able to cover things like that still, but think of all the things you couldn't build with taking up those 2 slots. You take up that large slot, you might not be able to build a staging area. You might not be able to build a farm level 3. You might not be able to build a lounge. The small slot, you might not be able to build a hydroponics now. You might not be able to build a fighting gym if you like those. I mean, there's so many things that you wouldn't be able to do if you have 2 of those slots that are very important in your game taken up by beds, because the beds really do nothing for you except keep your people a little bit happier, and that's basically it. So you're just basically keeping your people from rioting. And honestly, you're better off to just do that with Outposts, because why would you want all these beds in your base when you can use those beds to do something else? You can just send all those beds outside into the Outpost, and there you go. That's where they sleep, is the Outpost. Now, I say this, but I'm not saying, let's just get 6 beds Outposts and call it a day. There we go. We got 6 beds Outposts. That's 12 beds. All my beds are covered. There we go. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is use some kind of facility in your base that covers beds a little bit, but offset the rest of it with Outposts. So I would probably use the Red Talon bunk room, put that in a small slot. That's 5 beds right there. And then whatever beds I need beyond that 5 beds, I would probably send out to an Outpost. So if I have a community of 9, that's 2 beds Outpost. If I have a community of 12, well, then I need 4 beds Outposts. But you can actually get up to 7 Outposts now. So even if I had to use 4 beds Outposts, I'm fine with that, because that still leaves 2 beds Outposts I can use for ammo, and then 1 I can use for something else. Maybe I need a beds Outpost. Maybe I need a food Outpost. So you still have plenty of options as long as you just put a little bit of beds in your base and then use the rest in Outpost. And I think a lot of people do this already, but I have seen a lot of players still using barracks, which I don't recommend using the barracks that much, because the barracks, it takes up a large slot. Those large slots are so hard to come by, and they're so valuable. There's a lot better things you can use in large slots. So I don't ever recommend using a large slot for barracks. But yeah, that's why, I think the Beds Outpost is number 1. So going through the list again, number 1 is the Beds Outpost. Number 2 is the Ammo Outpost. Number 3 is the Medical Outpost. Number 4 is the Food Outpost. Number 5 is the Materials Outpost. Number 6 is the Parts Outpost, which is pretty rare. Number 7 is the Fuel Outpost. So that is our number 7. So that is our list. I hope everyone enjoyed this, and I hope, it makes sense what I was talking about and why I make the choices I do, because the outposts are very important to your survival in the game, and it's really important to understand what outposts you need most and which ones you don't really need to worry about that much, because I think there's a lot of players out there still that, think, okay, food outpost, I need food the most. Let me get, a bunch of food outposts, and there's my food. Yes, food is very important in this game, but I think a lot of players don't really realize that there's so many ways to get food in the game that the food outpost is not your top priority. And I think people wouldn't really understand as much that, beds and ammo are, a pretty high priority that you can't get in other ways. The ammo, they might understand a little bit more, because I'm sure a lot of players, understand that ammo is pretty scarce, but I feel like the Beds Outpost is really underrated, and hopefully this podcast, sheds some light on it and, gives some props to that Beds Outpost, because that Beds Outpost is definitely handy. And I will say, too, that I technically didn't list it in any of this discussion, but technically there's an 8th type of outpost. The 8th type of outpost would just be a general outpost that does nothing for you except have a supply locker. That would obviously be number 8, because it's not giving you anything per day. It's literally just a supply locker, and that's all it's there for. So there are a lot of buildings in the game that won't give you anything per day. They're not giving you any type of bonus. So I just didn't list that because it's not really a type of outpost. It's just, this is like the general outpost, I guess, if you want to call it anything. So if anything, if that's going to be on the list, the general outpost would be number 8, and that would be last place, because it does nothing for you at all. So you're better off to just have a outpost that actually is doing something for you. And technically, there is one other one I didn't mention, but it's not really worth ranking or putting in the list, in my opinion. There is one type of outpost. It basically is usually the Dirty Bird Espresso. It's just a little coffee shop, a little coffee stand. If you make that an outpost, then you can actually make coffee with that outpost. So that is, something to consider if you really want to use that to make coffee, but in my opinion, it's not really worthy of, being an outpost type. I mean, it's kind of just a novelty on the side of the road where, okay, let me just make this as a novelty real quick. Let me just use the locker. Oh, while I'm here, let me just make a couple coffees and then destroy the outpost and move on. Like, it's not something you would ever think about keeping. It's not something you would ever think about keeping long term, in my opinion. I guess if you have 7 outposts and you have 1 outpost slot that really isn't being used, you have your base already sustainable, maybe I could consider using that 7th outpost slot on the Espresso outpost, where it would be kind of just extra, on the side. But I would only recommend using that outpost if you have absolutely nothing else you need. If you need anything else, this is bottom of the barrel. But if you don't need anything else, okay, go ahead and make this. So I guess technically, if you were including the Espresso outpost and the general outpost as outposts, then the fuel outpost would be number 7, the Espresso outpost would be number 8, and then the general outpost would be number 9. So basically, the general outpost and the Espresso outpost, those would be bottom of my list, but I personally didn't think they classified enough as outpost types to really list in the list. But if you consider them in the list, then that is where I would put them. If you consider them to be, technical outposts, which maybe I should consider them technical outposts. I mean, technically speaking, they are outposts you can get. So I guess I can include them in the rankings. But so if they are included, then the new rankings would be Beds Outpost number 1, Ammo Outpost 2, Meds Outpost 3, Food Outpost 4, Materials Outpost 5, Parts Outpost 6, Fuel Outpost 7, Espresso Outpost 8, and then General Outpost 9. So it really does not change anything because these are like the bottom of the barrel where you're really not going to make much use of them. But I did want to make sure I at least mention that because I'm sure there will be someone out there that's thinking, hey, he never mentioned the espresso outpost. Hey, he never mentioned that there's an outpost you can get that just does nothing for you. So those outposts are there. Just, I think there's so much afterthoughts that, you know, I don't really think about them normally when I'm playing because they're just not really in my wheelhouse they're just not really worth it, I guess I would say. But that's pretty much all we have for today. So I hope everyone enjoyed this discussion on Outpost. I know it's probably not exactly an episode that people would be expecting to hear about, but I think Outposts are so important that I wanted to do an episode about it. But to kind of recap some of our news, next stream is possibly going to be on Sunday. If not Sunday night, then it would probably be Tuesday during the day. The next podcast is going to be next week on a Saturday, and we're not going to have a Wednesday one. Basically, I'm gearing up for the March 16th 1-year anniversary of the podcast, and I'm trying to make a lot of changes. You know, there's going to be changes to the schedule. There's going to be changes to, I'm going to be doing some things more, some things less. So there's going to be a lot of changes going on, and I'm kind of gearing up for that. So that being said, there's not going to be much of a Wednesday podcast until March 16th. Well, maybe, you know, maybe not much Wednesday podcasts again, period, but we'll get into that when we get to the new schedule. Because I haven't fully decided what I'm doing yet, but I'm trying to think on how best to work things around. So basically, you're going to have one Wednesday podcast on Crackdown 3 that I will commit to. So the week after Crackdown 3 releases, there'll probably be a Wednesday podcast about that, going over it. And up until March 16th, there will be State of Decay coverage every Saturday except maybe one. I might take 1 week off just to focus on gearing up for the 1-year anniversary. So basically, between today when you're hearing this and March 16th, there's 4 other potential State of Decay podcasts. Between that, I might take one of those weeks off. However, it will not be next week. If anything, it would be the February 23rd or March 2nd. So one of those 2 days, I might have a week off where there's no podcast at all. So I will let everyone know if that happens, but I'm thinking, if anything right now, it would probably be February 23rd would probably be the more likely date that I don't have any podcast, but we will get into that when it comes. But next week, I still do plan to have a podcast, so I will see you all next week for the next Saturday State of Decay podcast. Should be a lot of fun. And I'm really looking forward to our 1-year anniversary coming up, so I hope everyone tunes into that coverage. I have some pretty cool plans, I think, so we'll get to that more in the future. But if you want to contact me, you can contact me via email, theblaisexperience@gmail.com. You can contact me via Twitter and Xbox at Blaise XPerience, capital BLAISE, capital XPerience. If you want, you can contact me on YouTube comments or Facebook group comments, which we have a YouTube and Facebook group. I don't use them a ton right now, but they still are in use. And if you want to talk to me on Discord as well, I would love to hear from you. I have a Discord, which will be in the show notes. Just look in the show notes and you can find the Discord link. And that link in the show notes never expires, so you're always welcome to join that. And if you want to find the podcast, you're obviously listening to it right now, but if you want to listen to it a different way than you're listening to it right now, it is available on Stitcher, it's available on Spotify, it's available on Google Podcast, iTunes, Radio Public, Podbean, Blueberry, basically any directory you can think of, with the exception of iHeartRadio. I will try to get us on there. It's just a process to get on there, but hopefully it happens at some point. But basically anywhere you can think of, we're on there. So just check us out anywhere and let us know what you think. We are also on YouTube as well. So if you are someone that likes to watch a video more, then there is technically a video you can put on the background, and, you know, it has a little bit of sound waves, and it's not super, super fancy, but it definitely, you can watch it on YouTube if you want instead. So just look in these show notes and find my YouTube link. But that being said, you know, that's all we have for today, and I hope everyone enjoyed this discussion on Outposts. It was a lot of fun, and I look forward to being back next week. So thank you once again, everyone, for listening to The Blaise XPerience.